What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. And this one I'm going to go over a couple of pretty typical auction draft strategies that I think don't really get talked about very much. I think a lot of people will talk about different strategies you can take going into a snake draft and really just in general a fantasy football draft, stuff like hero RB, zero RB, robust RB. And I've done some videos on those, and I think you guys have enjoyed those as well. But I think that different strategies that you can take going into an auction draft are something that aren't often really thought about, especially because there's just a lot more flexibility you have in terms of the sort of teams you can build out in an auction draft. You can be super top heavy and have basically no bench, or you can be super deep and don't really not really have any stars, and you could be anywhere in between there just because of how much flexibility you have, given that you are truly able to get any single player that's available on the board. So I think there's a lot wider range of outcomes in terms of how you can build out your team in auction drafts, and I don't think it's talked about enough. So I really want to do a video on that. And if you guys like the video or want more auction content like this, please do let me know. If there's anything that I maybe missed or whatever, anything that you think, any other tips you guys have, feel free to let me know in the comments. I love interacting with you guys. And yeah, so let's get into the first strategy. So the first strategy that I think you can take in an auction draft is more of an aggressive static strategy. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as the studs and duds strategy, and it's basically where you target 2 to 3 really high-end performers, and then you're just trying to piece together the rest of your roster after that. You're probably going to have a really thin bench. You might even have a hole in your starting lineup at the start of the season, but you're going to have the most star power in your league probably. And it's also generally one of the easier strategies to pull off. It's more consistent when you get into an auction draft because by the end of the first 10 players off the boards, you've got 2 or 3 of them already, and then the rest of your team will just kind of come together as it is. But if you really are just dead set on getting 2 or 3 players, you can make sure you get those guys. And I don't think really much can happen during the course of your actual draft that's going to throw you off there. So it is one of the more predictable ways to approach your draft. Um, I'd like to say, or a good way of analyzing this, I think you can just imagine, say you traded like your third, fourth, and fifth round pick in a draft for an additional first in a snake draft. That's sort of what you're looking at here. You're going to have 2 or 3 super high end guys, but obviously you're going to be lacking that depth during in the middle of your lineup. So I'll put up an example here right next, and we can sort of go over how I put it together, and you guys can take a look at that now. So I put together a pretty standard aggressive roster here. I used all of these auction values I pulled directly from ESPN's website. So depending on your platform, these players might cost more or less. And you can also feel free to reference my auction values in terms of what I recommend you spend on players on my website as well. Those are free for you guys, but you're going to want to obviously take into account what pre-draft value you're seeing on your platform because that's generally going to be what most of your league mates will use in terms of determining how much they should be bidding on a player. So in this roster, I went ahead and basically took 2 of my top 3 receivers. I drafted Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill, and as you can see, that cost $130 in this. I'm assuming a $200 budget, so that total took up 65% of my budget. And in doing that, I know right away that I'm gonna have to spend $1 on a kicker and defense. You should do that always, regardless. And then I know that I'm only going to be able to get pretty much nobody's on my bench. I budgeted $2 for every single bench player. That's one of my tips in an auction draft that you should budget at least $2 for every single bench player on your team. It makes it so that you can bid on guys that other players nominate, and it really helps you increase the overall quality of your bench. That's something that I still try to do even in an aggressive strategy here. And then after that, obviously, I had to wait on running back because I took 2 really high-end wide receivers. So I ended up with James Conner and David Montgomery. I'm still able to target some higher-end quarterbacks and tight ends. I got Justin Herbert for $9, T.J. Hockenson for 15, and then Jerry Jeudy as my flex. So I think that this is a perfectly acceptable team. You're obviously going to be thin at running back here because you didn't have the budget to spend out elsewhere, but you've probably got the best wide receiver core in your league. You still get a good tight end, a good quarterback, and then you're just going to have a really thin bench, not a great running back room. So I like the team. I think that there's certainly ways you could improve it, and I'll touch on that later. But overall, this is just sort of the kind of team that you'd be looking at if you took this strategy. So the next strategy I'll talk about is more of a passive strategy, and generally the idea here is pretty much the opposite of the aggressive strategy. Pretty self-explanatory there. But what you're really doing here is you're going to wait on all the high-end players, and you're going to let effectively the whole first round in the snake draft go by without you having taken a player, and then you're going to have the most money in your league, so then you can really dominate the middle rounds. You can be a guy that buys 5 or 6 players that would have typically gone in that round's like 3 to 6 range. And a similar analogy here, imagine you're in a snake draft, but you traded your first round pick and maybe even your second round pick for a bunch of third, fourth, fifth, and sixth round picks. Um, Believe it or not, despite seeming somewhat safer because you're being passive, and I think passive is generally something that people would sort of correlate with being safe, it actually ends up being one of the riskiest strategies because if somebody else in your league does take the same approach, then you and another league member, or maybe even 2 if things go really poorly, are going to be bidding up the price on all of these middle tier players, and when that happens, you're effectively losing any edge you got by getting all these discounts because you guys are going to make these players go for the same prices that some of the guys in the second and third round went, and it's going to be really difficult for you to fill out as complete of a team you want. Um, this is a strategy that can work really well on paper. I often like how it looks when I build out a roster on paper here, and then when I get into an actual draft, it just doesn't really work out for me as well. So I think it's a strategy that you can take, but you're certainly going to lack that top end talent. If you do take the strategy, I would generally recommend that you draft some of those really high upside middle tier guys like boomer bust players like Mike Williams, for example, guys that actually have the upside to be true superstars on a week to week basis because you're not going to have that top 5 performing talent on your roster because you chose to wait on it. So you need to be a little bit more a little bit more willing to take risk with the guys that you actually end up drafting. And here, let's get into an example team I built. So taking a look at this example team built with using a passive draft strategy, I think the first thing you'll notice that's different from the aggressive draft strategy is the wide receiver room. Obviously, we don't have Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill, and instead we've got Keenan Allen and Chris Olave. Still two guys I really like, but I don't think anybody's here to argue that those guys are anywhere near the talent level or production level that you're going to get out of Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson. But with the money saved, we were able to upgrade our running back room. We were able to get Ramondre Stevenson, who we love, instead of David Montgomery as our running back one. On top of that, we managed to increase the quality of our flex a little bit, getting T. Higgins instead of Jerry Jeudy. And obviously, we were able to build out a really deep bench. We'd probably have one of the deeper teams in this league if you take this approach. And this certainly makes you, on paper, as you can see, this team looks really solid. I don't think it's going to be, it wouldn't be favored to win any leagues because, like I said, you've got a lot of capital on your bench that you're not necessarily using towards putting towards your starting lineup. And that's going to mean that there will be teams that get lucky from an injury standpoint that are just going to be better than you because they have that top end talent and you don't. This is certainly a good strategy if you want to be relatively safe in terms of just having a good team and probably making the playoffs, and your team's going to be able to survive injuries and bye weeks throughout the course of the season. Maybe you do get lucky and you hit on a guy who ends up being a top 5 performer, and that can really take you over the edge. So it certainly can work out, but I think it's a little bit harder to be a true league-winning team by taking this strategy. On top of that, this is assuming that I do get all of these players around that pre-draft value, and if in an actual draft someone took the strategy and was able to bid up a lot of these middle-tier players, you might see a much worse bench than you'd see here. So you're for sure missing out on the top-end star talent, and then you're also putting some risk in terms of what you're going to see on your bench. So as much as I do like this team, it's just generally not a team that I try to build because I don't like that risk of having to overpay for players at the end, and I always feel like I'm sort of outgunned when I go up against those teams that do have those true top-end talents. And finally, we've got the balanced draft strategy. This is sort of a hybrid between the aggressive and passive draft strategy. It allows you to still end up with some star power on your roster without having to completely sacrifice your bench. And unlike the aggressive draft strategy, it actually still gives you the opportunity to find values throughout your draft. If, for example, in that first team I built where you took Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill, and then say you have a third round grade running back, supposed to be $30, show up as a value, you're going to have a hard time convincing yourself to buy them because it's really just going to handicap the rest of your roster. You're going to be really poor, and it's going to be hard for you to find values because you just won't be able to afford them even when they present themselves. So I don't really find that getting one really good guy, one first round pick, maybe two like late first round picks tends to be the best approach here, just so that you can still find values throughout the draft and still have a little bit of depth. It also helps alleviate the risk by taking this balanced strategy of not having too much money at the end. If you do get that top end star talent, you're going to be not too worried about getting towards the end of your draft with too much money and just feeling like you wasted opportunities there. So here I'll show you guys an example team as well. So this team, you'll see, it's actually quite similar to the balance strategy we took here. The main difference you'll notice here is that instead of having a full bench of really quality players, we were able to sacrifice some of that bench depth and upgrade our running back to get Nick Chubb. I think that this is generally the sort of team I do find myself ending up with a build of. I find myself really targeting guys that are not the top tier performers that are going to be those $70, $80 guys, but I really find the best value that I would find normally at the end of the first round. I've got Nick Chubb as my running back forward in my rankings. I think he's going to be fantastic, and he tends to be a guy that I find myself drafting quite a bit of, and he's still a star enough that I think I'd feel really comfortable going into the season with him as my true running back one. And then I still have enough money left over on this team to build out a really great wide receiver room. I've got some depth in case I have any injuries, and overall I think I've got a really solid team here. So this is generally the sort of approach I generally find myself taking. I think all three of these teams are good, but I think that the balanced approach is definitely just going to give you more flexibility throughout the course of your draft and will be probably the best way to build out a team that you'll find you're actually happy with and fully utilizing all of the assets you have. So just a quick review here. I do tend to find myself taking more of a balanced approach towards my drafts. This does allow me to be more fluid throughout the course of my draft. I still get the opportunity to find values on high-end players. Like I say here, if there are values that present themselves in these high-end players, especially early in the draft, sometimes players are a little bit gun-shy, and you'll see that these top-end players, maybe the first player nominated, goes for way below auction value just because people aren't really necessarily even ready to get going into their draft. Then that's when I find myself being a little bit more aggressive. You've got to be ready to take those values if they present themselves. So if you can get a top 3 wide receiver for 10-20% off, then obviously you should do that. And I don't think there's any problem doing that. In smaller leagues, so maybe 8-10 team leagues, or in leagues with smaller rosters, including like the ones I showed here with just 2 wide receivers and a flex, I do think it pays to be more aggressive than passive. There are going to be plenty of opportunities in smaller leagues to get difference-making players on the waiver wire. They're going to help your team, and those opportunities are fewer and farther between in deeper leagues, teams with 3 wide receivers, 4 wide receivers even, or 12 or 14 team leagues. So in those 12 and 14 team leagues, I think it makes a little bit more sense to be a little bit more passive and try and build out more depth on your roster. But in smaller leagues especially, I think it makes sense to be more aggressive and just really focus on your starting lineup. Something I'll bring up is I also find myself taking a bit of a hybrid approach, sort of between that balanced and aggressive strategy. I find myself drafting a lot of guys that would normally go in like that second to third round. As you can see, a lot of these teams I built out here had guys like Nick Chubb, Ramondre Stevenson, Keenan Allen, Chris Olave, Mark Andrews. A lot of these guys have like second, third round draft grades, and I think that I find myself getting the most value out of my team when I really just stack up on those guys. I don't think there's a huge drop off often between the first round talent and these guys in the second and third rounds. And they come at a huge discount. Just for example, Mark Andrews, he's about $21 on ESPN. You'll see Travis Kelce go in for like 65. Obviously, Travis Kelce is my wide receiver 1. I've actually got him projected for like 4 points per game more, but getting that 66% discount on Mark Andrews compared to Travis Kelce to me just seems like a much better value. You see that sort of stuff all across the board. Another example, Ramondre Stevenson's about $31 on ESPN. You'll see top-end running backs like Christian McCaffrey go in for 70. Obviously, McCaffrey's better, but getting Ramondre Stevenson for less than half the price of McCaffrey just seems like a no-brainer to me. So those tend to be the kind of things I do. I like to build my team with as much I try to have as good of a starting lineup as I can while having still maybe 1 or 2 good players on my bench that I feel comfortable rotating in. And then after that, my bench tends to be just a really deep, or not really deep, but really just sort of dart throw approach, guys that I'm cycling throughout waivers, guys that I spent $1 or $2 on that I'm just more than willing to cut once the season starts. So that'll do it for the auction draft strategies video. I hope you guys liked it. If you did get anything out of it, please do take the time to like the video. It really helps to grow the channel. It really helps with the algorithm. If this was your first time on the channel, I do want to thank you so much for stopping by. I hope I was able to help you out. And if I did, please do subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. I'll be putting out pretty much a video every other day, maybe even more. I've been really active this off season. You're more than welcome to go look at my website for free rankings and auction values as well. Up next, I'll be doing the safest draft pick in every round. I'll probably follow that one up with the riskiest or the most bust-worthy draft pick in every single round. Just sort of go over which players I tend to be avoiding and drafting in every single round. So really enjoy making these videos. It's been a lot of fun. We're getting really close to football season. It's mid-July, and it's really going to sneak up on us here. So thank you guys so much for watching the videos, and I'll catch you next time.